My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the Noble Baroness Lady Stroud and endorse everything that she has just said, and if she does decide to test the opinion of the House, I certainly will support her in the lobbies. But I also support the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Durham, in his moving of Amendment 162, and also my reading of the Amendments 165 in the name of the Noble Lord Purvis of Tweed and the Noble Baroness Lady Kennedy of the Shores with Amendment 166. But my own amendment, my Lords, is Amendment 163, and it takes me back to an issue that I raised at committee stage. It concerns the provision within the designated safe and legal route, which I warmly welcome, and I applaud what the Prime Minister has said about the principle of doing this, but it would contain within it an element and a number to be determined by the Secretary of State for people with protected characteristics under Section 4 of the Equalities Act 2010, and the Noble Lord Stewart, who's in his place, will recall that I raised this issue on an earlier amendment at report stage. So I'm grateful to the Noble Baroness Lady Stroud, but also to the Noble Lord Cashman for signing this amendment, and also will listen carefully when the Minister comes to respond. I heard him say a few moments ago that there will be a consultation process, and perhaps if he can flesh that out, and even if the principle in this amendment is something that could be consulted on, certainly that would go some way to meeting my concerns. I've raised this issue on a number of previous occasions. I laid an amendment to the immigration bill debated in your Lordship's House on the 21st of March 2016, specifically focusing on those groups of people, such as the Yazidis and Christians, persecuted and even facing genocide because of their religion or belief. I raised it again in the Nationality and Borders Bill, debated on the 8th of February 2022. I focused on the case of the Yazidis, who are an ethno-religious group targeted by Daesh for annihilation as a clear-cut case of genocide. And even earlier this afternoon, with the Noble Baroness Lady Kennedy of the Shores, we held a meeting with officials from the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office about the continued failure of the United Kingdom to respond to the genocide of the Yazidis, even though a German court has now determined that such crimes have been committed against the Yazidis. I personally visited northern Iraq in 2019 and took evidence from the groups I've just described. Germany, along with Canada and Australia, has famously opened its doors to the victims of this genocide, offering them sanctuary and a safe haven. By contrast, my Lords, we have used the absence of safe and legal routes to prevent these vulnerable and targeted communities from being able to find a way of accessing refugee status, asylum status in the United Kingdom. If our present mechanisms are working as intended, why have Yazidi victims of the Daesh genocide from Iraq not been granted resettlement in the UK? Of course, we may not be able to help all victims. Of course not. But why can't we help a few? This is unacceptable, which is why I've tabled this amendment. Over the years, we've seen how we've failed to support even single individuals because there's no safe or legal route. So I'm not talking about millions of people. I'm not talking about thousands of people. I'm talking about individual cases. By way of example, I went to Pakistan and met Supreme Court judges to plead for the case of Asia Bibi, a woman who'd spent years on death row and, having been acquitted of so-called blasphemy charges, faced death threats from mob groups. Her case, and that of a young Christian Pakistani woman who was abducted, forcibly converted and forcibly married, were raised directly with the Home Office. And yet, my Lords, although there was plenty of sympathy, it didn't result in any practical help. This amendment would enable tea and sympathy to be turned into the kind of response that mercifully, in that case that I just cited, the Canadian government was able to give. During the committee stage, I raised the case of Mubarak Bala, president of the Nigerian Humanist Association, who was sentenced to 24 years in prison for a so-called blasphemy post on Facebook. If he was to be acquitted or released, he would most certainly face death threats and as such would be in need of a safe haven. Nigeria is one of 71 countries that criminalises blasphemy. As long as these laws exist, people will face persecution, prosecution and imprisonment, and some will even face the death threat and will be pushed to find safe havens abroad. This amendment then won't help everyone, and of course I would like, as the Noble Lord Paddick has said to me in conversation, something broader, and hopefully one day we will get to that. But I would like to commend this modest amendment to the Minister. It is a beginning. It would provide assistance to people with protected characteristics understood under Section 4 of the Equalities Act, and people who are often discriminated against before and because of these protected characteristics. This also means protection, of course, for members of the LGBT community. In a book on genocide published last year, I highlighted the treatment of gay people during the Daesh genocide in Syria and Iraq. Some were thrown from high buildings, others burnt in cages. I welcome the decision then of the government to find a formula for safe and legal routes, but within it, I would urge the government to incorporate a small element which would enable us to respond to such individual cases of extreme persecution, including those targeted because of their protected characteristics. My Lords, this is the 75th anniversary this year of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which includes within it Article 18, which protects the right to believe or not to believe or to change your belief. It's also the 75th anniversary of Raphael Lemkin's Genocide Convention. This would be a small contribution to putting some of the well-meaning rhetoric in those declarations into practical effect. It's the right thing to do, my Lords, and I commend it to you.